Hindus in India can't rely on their political leaders to save Hinduism. It has to come from within. It has to come from each individual Hindu. The narratives are put into place as a way to bring down the Hindu identity.
How important do you think this visit was?
They are now looking towards India, for all of the lessons that India went through since Modi came in power. When a Hindu temple gets attacked in Canada, this is not an Indian national problem. This is a Canadian Hindu problem.
Have you ever heard about Hindu Rashtra?
India, the Bharat, is the cradle of Hinduism. So why is it that you want to deny that identity? Any assertion of a positive Hindu identity is always met with these Hindu radicals. There is no other country that is for Hindus.
So what is it that inspires you to follow Hindu as a religion as of now?
Seeing Modi, for the Ram Mandir Janmabhoomi performing puja and doing all that, I'm looking at that and my jaw dropped, because I'm like, you have your prime minister actually doing puja, stuff that we do. The Hindu community in the 80s and the 90s and the early 2000s was to go beyond our simple pujas and building the mandirs.
Do you think that Justin Trudeau, by feeding such elements on its soil, it will hurt his own country in the long run?
100%. I am not an Indian national. I am a Canadian. The way that they go to attack Hinduism is by attacking India. That when it comes time for us to sort of walk out into society and sort of, say that, yes, I am proud to be Hindu. I am Canadian. I am also a Hindu. That strong voice is not quite there yet. Yeah, because India, with a population of 80% Hindus, is a different way to look at the world.
Hindu traditions, its values and culture is one of the oldest civilizational threads that binds us in one Sanatan Dharma. At a time when India under Prime Minister Modi is undergoing Sanatan Revivalism and his visit to South American countries like Guyana is being prioritized in Indian PM store, what we see on the other hand is that our brothers and sisters abroad are facing some heinous brutalities. Temples are being attacked and Hindus are persecuted wherever they are in minorities. But still, there are some people like Shawn Binda, who despite being a Canadian-born Hindu with Indo-Caribbean heritage, has been an active flag bearer of Hindu cultural heritage within Canadian ecosystem and is very vocal in acknowledging his Indian ancestry. Today I have Shawn with me and I'm going to speak to him on his journey of being an Hindu activist and how he's taking on the toxic narrative against Hinduism in the West and how is his Indo-Caribbean roots helping him in this mission. So welcome to our channel, Shawn.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so Shawn, first let me ask you to introduce yourself to our viewers about your background, your roots that connects you with India first.
Yeah, my name is Shawn Binda. I was born and raised in Toronto, Canada. My parents are originally from the island of Trinidad and Tobago, which is an island just north of South America. They were born and raised in that island, and then they migrated to Canada. My dad came up in 1972, and then myself and my siblings were all born here. And growing up here in Canada, my parents did work and struggle to maintain the Hindu tradition. And now you find me where I am today.
Why do you say that they struggled?
Because maintaining a Hindu identity in a different environment where Hinduism is not the culture that surrounds you is something that you actively have to work at. And we could go into this later on in this conversation, but all of that work that my parents did to help instill the values of Sanatan Dharma within myself, within our community, has led me onto the path where I am, where you probably found me on YouTube doing videos on Hinduism. But it's something that it is an active process. It's something that you actually have to have an intent to actually make it work. And that's why I said it was a struggle, because if you don't acknowledge the struggle, then you're not going to appreciate the work that was done.
That's true, Shawn. So first, I wanted to ask you that you must have seen PM Modi's recent visit to Guyana. Like, he was the first Indian Prime Minister to visit there, like in past 56 years? And you
Yes.
being someone with a Caribbean heritage. So what do you think of this visit of PM Modi?
The funny thing is that many people reached out to me because I was sharing snippets and videos and quotes that he had said. And a lot of people reached out to me asking, why are you sharing this? Like, what does it mean to you? So I would say that, one of the overarching themes from being a Hindu from the Caribbean is that there is not a greater acknowledgement of the struggles that we went through. And by we, I mean my ancestors in the Caribbean Caribbean to maintain that Hindu identity. And one of the things that for people like myself growing up here in North America is that we often meet Indians from India that when they look at me, they see, hey, you look Indian. Where are you from? Where are your parents from? And then every time I have to go into the history of how our ancestors were part of the indentured labor ship, and how they were brought over from India to the Caribbean to work on the sugarcane plantations. And many times, and even as recent as a few weeks ago, I had to tell this story again and again and again. So by having Modi in the Caribbean, in Guyana, it helps to actually just bring a greater awareness to the general Indian population that, hey, there's a history that maybe you don't know about. Maybe it's something that we can look into. So I think that is probably the first part. The second important thing about him coming there is that it helps to create a connection for people like myself who have not been to India yet to connect to Bharat, that motherland, that spiritual homeland for Hinduism. And I know that for a lot of my peers, people my age, is that there isn't that connection there because we don't physically have anyone there anymore. But to see him come and to participate and to acknowledge that, yes, we did work hard to maintain that identity, it just helps to cement this greater Hindu identity, more of a global Hindu identity, not something that is stuck to one specific region.
That's true. But we even saw Prime Minister Modi having some curry there and some other delicacies. Can you tell us a little, what was that? How was he trying to connect with you?
Yeah, so I mean, if you're growing up in India, you know that there's a lot of meals that are prepared and they're served on a banana leaf. So in taking that tradition, and when our ancestors came to the Caribbean, and specifically in Guyana, they had to recreate something along the same lines. And what they did is that they used a water lily leaf, and locally it's known as a porine leaf, and they actually serve food inside there. And the leaf is like a bowl. And for every Hindu puja or function or wedding or festive occasion, food is served in this leaf. And the famous thing in Guyana is that they would actually specifically make at least 7 different curries on top of rice and dal, and that's what they would serve. And when I saw the images of him being served 7 curries, and then he even acknowledged it in his speech afterward, it kind of made me, just kind of like, this warm, like, fuzzy feeling in my heart. I'm like, hey, he's participating in something that I grew up here in Canada with, that was brought over from our ancestors from the Caribbean.
Okay. So also, how important do you think this visit was, if I talk in terms of geopolitics or maybe for the larger Indian diaspora across the world?
Yeah, I mean, the geopolitics is very important. As your audience may be aware, is that Guyana has oil, and there has been a recent upsurge in their economy. The GDP is growing, and I think it's important that India, also as a growing superpower, get their feet in the door there. And I think it's important because for us for myself growing up here in North America, the land of my parents, the land of our community, was always traditionally very poor. I mean, that's one of the reasons why my parents left. So my parents are from the island of Trinidad and Tobago. My wife's parents are from Guyana, and they all left in the 70s because of the economic outlook. Now to see how Guyana has now made leaps and bounds ahead as an emerging superpower, they are now looking towards India, for all of the lessons that India went through since Modi came in power to become an emerging superpower. I think it is important. And there's also that connection. And I mean, Modi also made mention of it. We have cricket, as a more of a lighthearted approach, but there is that connection that our ancestor, that there are Indians that left India to establish there. I think that's more the reason to actually cement that relationship and to actually, have a place there. And I think every Indian in the Caribbean would want that.
Okay, so also since we are talking so much about your Indo-Caribbean descent, so I mean for us, it is very overwhelming to see that at a time when the West is like in full attack mode against the Sanatan Dharma and Hindus, you have embraced Hinduism. So what is it that inspires you to follow Hindu as a religion as of now?
So the first answer is the work of my parents. It is important that everyone who is of marrying age, that has kids, that want to have a family, is that it is the work that you do today that will instill those values. And that is what I have had to look at growing up. So my dad, when he left the island of Trinidad and Tobago and he came here, he was the founding president of a local mandir here. So he built that up from the ground. Every weekend, every religious function, we would attend the mandir. We learned how to sing the bhajans. And when I say we, this is me and my siblings. I have an older brother. I have a younger sister. We participated in all the pujas and all the religious festivals. And it was through that sacrifice, that dedication, that those values got instilled in myself, my brother, and my sister. And as we got older, we have started realizing is that the struggle to maintain the Hindu identity, it is important that it is something that is at the forefront of your mind. If it's something that you sort of take for granted, you are not going to work to preserve it. And I think this is common among any Hindu that has grown up here in the West, is that if you are living in a country like India, and I would even say in Trinidad or Guyana, is that you walk out of your home and Hindu-ness sort of embraces you. So it's not something that is very active in your back of the mind. You exit your house and you see the mandir, you go for darshan, and then you continue on with your day. You come here now in Canada and you walk out your door and you're looking around, you're like, okay. And then it's after, some time, I find that the immigrants start realizing, hey, we need to take more of an active role. So I think that is what has cemented the Hindu identity for many of us here in the West. That being said, it's still not easy because the pull of modernism, of consumerism and all of that is still, it's a struggle to balance both.
Definitely. But since for how long have you been there in Canada, by the way?
Born and raised there. So
how has the situation changed for Hindus there specifically? Like we have seen like a few weeks back, or every now and then we see how there have been like so many attacks that is happening on Hindu temples by pro-Khalistan radicals. So how do you see like this continuous attacks on Hindus in Canada by these extremists who are harbored by your own country?
So when I was growing up, the Hindu population, and it still is a minority. And what is happening now is not something that was happening back then. And the Hindu community here was allowed to grow and prosper, if you want to use those words. The one thing that we failed to do as a Hindu community in the 80s and the 90s and the early 2000s was to go beyond our simple pujas and building mandirs, is to actually see what it takes to go into the political landscape of Canada. And that is where now we see now in 2024 is that there are Khalistani extremists that are going and attacking Hindus. And for someone like myself, the question that I get asked is that, you're not of Indian background in the sense that your parents are not citizens of India. So how does this affect you as a Hindu? And what I have to tell a lot of people is that when a Hindu temple gets attacked in Canada, this is not an Indian national problem. This is a Canadian Hindu problem. And at no point should any mandir be under attack. And it's unfortunate that, when I looked at all of those attacks that were happening, it brings me back to when my parents came in the 70s and the overt, racism that they had to face. And you fast forward 50 years now, and I'm having to ask myself, what really has changed? Because, you were scared back then to actually show who you are as a Hindu. And now even today with these attacks on the temple, we have devotees of the mandirs actually saying, we're scared to go to the temple right now. What is the government doing to alleviate those fears? And it's unfortunate, but I would say that the most recent attacks have galvanized the community right now to start saying, hey, enough lying down, enough sitting back. It's high time we do something more.
Like, since we're talking about the government there, do you think that Justin Trudeau, by feeding such elements on its soil, it will hurt his own country in the long run?
100%. The strange thing that has happened right now is I had posted a few videos about this, and when I posted it, a lot of the attacks that I got were from the far right Canadians saying, every brown-skinned person must get deported. And I would answer back in the comments, whether it be on X or YouTube or Instagram, saying, I was born and raised here. I am not an Indian national. I am a Canadian. And my parents, yes, I have an Indo-Caribbean background, but where are you going to send me? Now, that is the answer from the extreme far right. But what has happened is that the moderate Canadians are now starting to realize, hey, the Hindus are not a problem here. The Hindus have been growing their community and have just been going along their way. And now they're stuck in the middle of this battle. And there's a lot more response from the Canadians starting to realize how Khalistani extremism in Canada has been allowed to fester from the 80s. And yes, it was sort of like, going slowly. But in the last 10 years since Trudeau has taken power, he has allowed this to now explode. The changes in immigration, in allowing so many immigrants in without proper vetting processes, has angered a lot of Canadians, and rightfully so, because you don't want to see the very nature and fabric of this country destroyed by radical elements. So I am happy to see that the average Canadian is waking up to these issues, and we'll see what happens in the next election.
But what we see is that Canada is sort of taking like a U-turn. First, they started blaming Prime Minister Modi or our top leaders for the attack, for the Niger attack. And now they've taken a U-turn. They're like, they don't have any link of Prime Minister Modi's link with Niger. And then we even see Khalistanis shouting like the Canadians go back to Europe. So what is it that is happening? Why are they taking a U-turn now? First they started blaming India for it. Now they're taking a U-turn. They're saying, no, there is no link of PM Modi with Niger's plot.
The whole thing is to actually take everyone's eyes away from the problems that Canadians are facing. I am lucky in the sense that I was able to purchase a home and establish myself, back in the mid 2000s. But for a lot of younger Canadians that are now entering the workforce, things like employment, the cost of living, homes, all the things that you want your politicians focused on have just been shot out the door. And what Trudeau has done is that to take away from all the issues that Canadians are facing, he is making this whole thing about foreign interference in our Canadian government. He has made that his talking point. But I think he's not fooling anyone, because the poll numbers and all of that is showing we've had numerous by-elections here in Canada where the Liberal Party, who has had historically winning these seats for 30 plus years, losing these seats now in by-elections. So I think the writing is on the wall. And I hope that in the next election that whoever becomes the prime minister does not follow in the same line that he has done, because Khalistanis as one issue is in all the parties. As much as people want to prop up the conservatives saying that they are going to save Canada, there are Khalistani elements in that party as well. We all know about the NDP and Jagmeet Singh, and of course the Liberals. So it's important that us as Hindus, what the messaging has been for us right now is to go and speak with any of the politicians of any parties and get them to denounce Khalistanis. That I think is, regardless of the party, whoever you want to follow, every politician needs to denounce that and make sure that this does not fester anymore in our country.
But Shawn, do you think that this negativity, this toxic narrative that is there against the Hindus has to do something with the Western media?
That is a very good point. I think that the history of how Hinduism has been portrayed in Western media has a huge influence. Anytime, and I came on YouTube in 2016, and even prior to that, any positive talk about Hinduism always gets clouded by Indian politics and trying to portray India in a bad light. And and the way that they go to attack Hinduism is by attacking India. And I think all of those narratives have now fed into where we are today. And it's unfortunate because Hinduism has so much to show the world, to teach the world, but this is the world that we live in. I do have to say that due to social media, whether it be on YouTube or X or Instagram, that it is allowing people like yourself, people like me, to actually tell our stories. And more there has been a pushback. Just recently, I was reading something about how all the mainstream newspapers here in Toronto have seen just a slow decrease of subscribers and people wanting to list them. And what's happening is now there's an increase in sort of citizen journalism where people are going out and telling their story. So I think there is a shift. The important thing though is not to rest on it. We have to continue to push and to create our own voices in these platforms that we have.
So do you think that this world Hindu phobia exists there? As in the people from Indian descent or maybe the Hindus are looked down upon in Canada?
Yes, I absolutely do believe that Hindu phobia is an actual real thing and Hindus are looked down. And Hindu phobia has two aspects to it. We can easily point to the external forces that we have, meaning the media and the general perception and all the policies and procedures we have in our workplace or even in schools where Hindus are just they have to struggle through to actually get what they want. But Hindu phobia is also something internal to Hindus as well, is that for so long we have been this colonial mindset and has sort of brainwashed our ways of thinking where we ourselves can't express what it means to be Hindu in a positive way, that we have internalized all of these negative traits that when it comes time for us to sort of walk out into society and sort of say that, yes, I am proud to be Hindu, I am Canadian, I am also a Hindu, that strong voice is not quite there yet. So we do have work to do, is that first of all, we have to cement our sense of what it means to be a Canadian, what it means to be a Hindu. And then from there, now, if we can do that first, then everything else starts to fall into place.
And you know what, specifically I've seen there is a pattern wherever Hindus are in minorities, they are persecuted there. For instance, if we talk about the Bangladeshi Hindus. So what is the role of government there, or why is it happening in such places?
The role of the government, of course, is to protect the rights of the minorities. The question of why is it happening is that the world that we have grown up in the last 100, 200 years is framed by these Western frameworks, a Judeo-Christian notion of the world. And the push for a different way to interpret the world that we see is very hard for a lot of these powers that be to swallow. And I think is that the changing of the world order of new superpowers emerging, and we have to look at India, because India, with a population of 80% Hindus, is a different way to look at the world. And I mean, India is working at trying to define what it means to have a national identity, whether that identity be Hindu or not. I know that there's many arguments on both sides. For myself, I think it's important that India identifies as a Hindu civilization, because it will provide the world a better framework as to how is it that we coexist with so many different cultures and religions and different ways to interpret, everything that makes up this world. So I would say that governments, because they're largely based on Western ideologies and Judeo-Christian notions of how to interpret the world, that in itself has led to the issues that we have in countries like Bangladesh, where Hindus are being persecuted, and even here in Canada as well, is that we always speak about the rights of minorities and all of those things, but look at what we're facing right now. Is that we're facing as a Hindu, where we're having our Hindu temples attacked. So there is a lot of work that still needs to get done.
But like if I talk about India, so do you think that Hinduism or Sanatan Dharma is in safer hands? Because we have seen Prime Minister Modi proudly wearing Hinduism on his sleeves. So do you think it is in safer hands here?
That I think is an interesting question. Do I think it's in safer hands? I'll just say no. I actually don't think it's in safer hands, because India right now is largely westernized. If you look at all the big cities, and the push to maintain a Hindu identity is not there. It's something that is taken for granted, which is why, just if I look at my own story and the people that have surrounded me in our community here, everyone that comes and meets me in person, the first thing that they do is they scratch their head and like, how is it that you guys maintain this Hindu identity? And this is even outside of the whole Caribbean aspect, is that even simply growing up here in Canada. So as a Canadian Hindu, the push to maintain that Hindu-ness is probably stronger than someone in India, where there are so many forces that are trying to bring it down. What I think needs to happen in India, and I've done a few videos on this as well, is that Hindus in India can't rely on their political leaders to save Hinduism. It has to come from within. It has to come from each individual Hindu. And I think that's where lessons can be learned from people from the West, where we have had to maintain our identity in the absence of any political leadership that is openly Hindu. Is that if the Hindu can save themselves, then society falls in rank. But to put your hopes on a political leader that is at the whims of, the media and voting and all of that is not the first answer. It certainly helps. I mean, I'm not going to lie. Like seeing Modi, for the Ram Mandir Janmabhoomi performing puja and doing all that, like I'm looking at that and my jaw drops, because I'm like, you have your prime minister actually doing puja stuff that we do. It certainly helps, but the first work that has to be done is the individual Hindu.
So what are these forces that you're talking about, because of which Hinduism is in danger here? What are these forces basically?
So just reading in media and on the internet, there's a push from the academics to constantly, the word that I want to say is downgrade Hinduism, to view the Hindu way of looking at things as something inferior. So when you have this constant push to make Hinduism as an inferior way to interpret the world, this is going to have ramifications on Hindus just growing up. So even simple things like doing puja, sometimes like the first thing you get is that, oh, why are you guys doing that? Those superstitious activities, and it's these little things that happen there, and then it gets mainstreamed by a lot of these influencers now, and there's a whole bunch of them that are just constantly going on the attack about we need to get rid of all of these ancient practices. We need to modernize ourselves, but there's a balance of the two. That there is no reason why we need to forget everything that has been part of our civilization for so long, and in doing that, if we can remember all those things, I think we have a way to actually show the world how we can go into the 21st century and beyond.
But in India, if we talk about the past 1 decade, there has been Hindu revivalism that's been done under Prime Minister Modi. So have you seen those changes, or what do you think about them?
I think a national sense of identity has certainly changed. And that is 100% a good thing. On the flip side of that national identity now in media is now getting termed as something negative. So my question to everyone watching this is that how do you change that narrative? because any assertion of a positive Hindu identity is always met with these Hindu radicals. Like people even call me that, is you're this Hindu radical just because you're proud to be Hindu. So I think a greater national sense of Hinduness is always welcomed. And how is it that we can now make this into a positive narrative? Because what is out there is, of course, negative. And we've even seen it now in the US elections, is when Donald Trump won, and with him was, of course, Vivek Ramaswamy and Tulsi Gabbard. These are two Hindus, and now that they have positions within his cabinet, we're seeing all the attacks come from mainstream media, mainstream North American media. So there is still a long way to go,
Definitely. And have you ever heard about Hindu Rashtra?
Yes.
What are your
Yes, I
thoughts
have.
on it? I mean, it's a much debated, much controversial, or a much talked about subject. What are your thoughts on it?
Okay, so let me ask you one question first. What is controversial about it?
Controversy as in both sides are talking about it. People have their own narratives, like it's do's or don'ts. Like Hindu Rashtra, somebody thinks it's too nationalist, someone thinks it's not. So in that terms.
So my view is that India, the Bharat, is the cradle of Hinduism. So why is it that you want to deny that identity? A Hindu Rashtra does not mean that it is not open to any other religion or culture or anything like that. Historically, we have seen that India has welcomed everyone into its land. So a Hindu Rashtra is not by definition excluding anyone. The problem is that the minute you say that, people have the sense is that if India becomes a Hindu Rashtra, then all the other religions are going to get kicked out. But no, I mean, other religions have allowed to form, have allowed to congregate, have allowed to grow in India without persecution for time. I mean, we see it with our Jewish brother and sisters. Of course, the Muslims have had a big part of Indian history, and we have seen it with the Parsis and all of these faiths that have been allowed to just be there in India. India also has the most churches in any country in the world, Christian churches. So tell me now, like, how is it that if India, with a population of 80% Hindus, roughly, if they want to identify as a Hindu Rashtra, what is wrong with that? There is no other country that is for Hindus. So I don't see a problem in it.
Muslims in India, they are attacked, they are persecuted. That's the narrative in the West. Do you think like there should be a narrative as such, or is it true?
I don't think the narratives are true. The narratives are put into place as a way to bring down the Hindu identity. That is my fundamental feeling about all the narratives that Muslims are under attack, and it's unfortunate because the way that Hindus view other religions is one of openness. Is that you are allowed to believe whatever it is you want to believe. There's nothing stopping that. It is one of mutual respect, and it is one that I think the world needs to embrace. Whereas you have other religions that are exclusive, meaning that if you don't believe what I say, then you are condemned to hell. So now you tell me, you weigh these two things, which one is actually better for the world? One that is accepting of every belief, that you do whatever it is you want to do because that is your truth, versus one that is saying is that if you don't believe what I believe, then you're condemned to hell. And I think that message is what is being lost, is that message is what needs to come out when we talk about a Hindu identity.
Okay, Shawn, so I saw one of your Facebook posts where you wrote about Swami Sanatan and the pseudo-Vedantic student that's written by him. Are you inspired by his teachings, or do you follow what is written in Hindu scriptures? Because let me tell you that Sivanand Ashram, it's here in Rishikesh, which is near to where we have our office. That's near Dehradun, and they have their headquarters of the Divine Life Society. So are you inspired by it, like the Hindu teachings or maybe Hindu scriptures?
100%. When my journey into where I got today, as I'd mentioned, I was born and raised into a Hindu family, doing all the pujas and everything else. When I got into university, my mindset sort of changed into a lot of philosophy, and that is what I got my degree in. But it was a lot of Western philosophy, and it was during that time that I started reading more and more up like what is it that Hindu philosophy teaches us. And I would say that yes, the teachings of Swami Shivananda, Swami Chinmayananda, Swami Dayananda, Saraswati ji as well, all of these things I think go to cement how is it you frame your mind when you are growing up here in the West. And that, along with the actual practical physical things that I can do, has really sort of created and set me down the path that I'm on right now. It's important that as Hindus, what I say here, and I teach Hinduism to young kids in the Mandir, is that it's important that whatever you read, that Hinduism isn't something that is just merely an intellectual thing that you go through in your mind and you just sort of like ponder what is the world about. There are physical things that we do as well. So yoga, meditation, pujas, the rituals, all of these things have to come together. And I think that if you try to do one without the other, you're going to be lost. It's important that we understand why we do what we do, but it's also important that we understand the deeper philosophy behind Hindu teachings as well.
That's true, Shawn. So lastly, just want to end by asking you that where do you think Hinduism as a religion stands today in 21st century?
I think Hinduism today is on an upward climb. I don't think we've reached the peak yet, and I don't think we've gotten to the point where we can say that we are quote unquote safe. I think where we are is better than where my parents were when they came, is that there's more and more people that are now more openly Hindu. But in the rise of Hindus, what we are now seeing is that all of the challenges that we face from mainstream society, because historically Hinduism has always been down because of how others have interpreted what is it that we are. Now that we are finding our voice, the climb is there, but it's not without its struggles. And the hard part that I find is that many of us are not up to challenging the status quo. Is that we continue to do our own practices, but the minute there's something external that is starting to attack us, we tend to just retreat. So I think the next few years are going to be interesting, is that if we see Hinduism come under attack, what is it that we're going to do? Do we just retreat and go back? Just recently, for Ganesh Visarjan here in Ontario, this was something that we were doing for the last 30 years, where we would make a murti out of clay or dirt and bring it into the water. This past September, when we were doing it, there was a Hindu group that put a murti in that didn't dissolve. And what that meant is that a lot of Western Canadians, white Canadians, saw it and they're like, hey, you guys are polluting our lakes. So the interesting thing is that the reaction from the Hindu side is that there were many Hindus saying, oh, we shouldn't be bringing our Hindu practices out in the open. Is that when I do this puja, I do it inside my home so that others can't see. And then when I saw this, I'm like, is that the message that we want to be giving the next generation? Is that we should be afraid, that we shouldn't feel proud to do all of our Hindu celebrations? And I think that is where that balance needs to be found, is that as Hinduism starts to rise, we also have to rise in terms of our strength and the ability to actually combat all those negative challenges that we are going to face. So are we there yet? No. I still think that we're on that upward tick.
Let's just assure we are there soon.
I hope we're there, but I think it's still going to take a lot of work.
Definitely.
I think it's going to take a lot of work.
Definitely. It was a very insightful conversation with you, Shawn. Looking forward to having more such conversations with you in future.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on.